So how do you make your players feel like they're in another world in tabletop roleplay games? And I don't just mean a fantasy setting, I mean another place, another terrain, another plane of existence, something that's different than your normal setting. In general, when this happens, the campaign in the normal world of going through forests and valleys and mountains and whatever is pretty normal. There's no different mechanics or a different feel, but sometimes you really want to put the pressure on them or put different mechanics in there to spice it up and make them go to a desert or an Arctic tundra or an entire plane of existence. But we're going to break down in this video how you can actually make and transport and let that feeling of being in another place, another location, actually translate to the table. What do you need to have and think about to be able to do this? And I'm going to use an example from a PDF that we just published and released this month for desert setting. Time out, that's right. Me and my team every single month give you guys Dungeon Master resources to help lower your game prep time, help your creation time, lighten the load on the shoulders of Dungeon Masters to try and help you out. This month we released a desert survival PDF with the entire system I'm going to be laying out here in this video. An entire sitting of the Adwaldi Desert to be able to actually have a location to play in, desert hazards, desert NPCs, magic items, and bonus level up perks all in one resource. And we do this every single month. So if you want a bunch of cool resources every single month, check out the link down below and help support what we do here in all of these type of little resources we can make for Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop roleplay games and the production of the new TTRPG, DC20 RPG. So check that down in the description. Now let's get hot in some deserts. So I got 4 things for you to be able to think about, and then we're going to go through the example from the desert PDF of showing you how to actually implement these things. Because it's not enough to go to the desert or go to an Arctic tundra and just simply say you're there and give cool descriptions. You can totally do that and like say that it's hot, but the mechanics also translate the feeling at the table. Whenever a monster, and you say something about a monster and it has like a plus 10 or 15 or 12, something huge to hit, that fear that the players feel around the table is also the fear that the characters would have at the table. So a lot of time mechanics and showing your hand with mechanics sometimes to let the player see what mechanics are going on gives the setting of the tone of what is actually happening in the game. Okay, so the first thing here is mechanics. You need the mechanics of this certain location you're going to be different than what they're normally used to. When you go to the desert, it's hotter, but mechanically, how is it expressed to be hotter? An example that Dungeons and Dragons has is in Icewind Dale, which was the entire reason why I made the Icewind Dale survival guide PDF, which is also I'm going to put down in the description with a huge discount code, but that'll be down there. What they did is every hour when you're in the cold, you had to make a Constitution saving throw. And I just don't think that that's a fun way to do it, is to, one, now you have to track hours and then you're having to force rolls all the time. No. I don't think that's the best way to do it, because you want these mechanics to give the flavor and the feel that you're in this new type of location, but you don't want it to be overbearing and annoying. These mechanics can be internal or external whenever it comes to what's happening to the player and what type of things are happening to their body or what type of things are happening around them. Weather is a great example of this, of what type of things happen in the area always. How does magic work differently, which is the interaction of your character with the environment. So in a desert type of climate, if you cast spells that have water in nature, maybe they're different. Maybe if you ice spells melt immediately. You shoot a ray of frost, it fizzles and drops in front of you, which is also a mini timeout you have to take as yourself as a dungeon master of how overbearing do you want these mechanics to be to their play experience. If you have a player that's entirely based around a certain way to cast magic and you're like, oh yeah, when you're in this zone, you're screwed, that might not be the fun time for that player. I, in general, as a dungeon master, make sure that players have creative ways to think around it or overcome these, which actually get to the second point I'm going to say here is gear. Give your players, with as oppressive and crazy and different as these different type of mechanics are, which I'll get into examples here in a second. As crazy as these things are, you want to be able to give them solutions to overcome these or prepare themselves before they go there. Or once they've been there and learn how crazy it is, they can come back, prepare themselves in some way to alleviate those negative mechanics in place. So if you know you're going to go to the cold, bundle up and get some gear. If you know you're going to go to the hot desert, there's some stuff you can prepare for. And then the third thing is travel and transportation. How are you going to be able to move around this place, right? It's the desert. Traveling should not just be normal and you're just trudging on through. You can make things like, oh, it takes you longer to go through. And if that's as far as you want to go down the mechanical rabbit hole where travel in the desert's twice as long because you have move at half speed or something, that's mechanically making them feel like they're in the desert, but maybe you could do a little more than that. And in the same way I just talked about having these hard mechanics, but you have gear that you can get to combat that. There's hard travel and terrain that you have to go through, but you can have transportation to combat that. In the Icewind Dale PDF, we have dog sleds and those little birds and polar bears sleds you can ride, and there's a whole system for that. And in this desert, there's a sand riding scorpion. You can mount scorpions that travel across the desert. Super cool. So now now not only is the desert or whatever this terrain is cool and interesting because of the mechanics, it's also cool and interesting because of the things you get into the game for them to overcome these mechanics. So now let's get into some examples how me and my team handle desert survival here. So first page of the PDF talks about extreme heat checks. Whenever you're in extreme heat for a certain period of time, and again, that's on your dungeon master to kind of think how long of an exposure to this heat, how hot is it for how long of time before a heat check happens. And it has a whole chart here that lays out DC 10 heat checks would be, okay, it's pretty hot, it's nothing big, a little slap on the wrist, you're probably going to succeed on the check. Going all the way up to a DC 30, deadly heat, it's 130 degrees, you're going to melt. My favorite part of this chart is that customizable little bottom section here of additional heat check conditions, right? This gives some customizability to that DC for wherever you're going. Maybe you can add 5 or add 2 depending on how intense you want this, increasing DC to be for exposed skin. If you're not wearing anything that's protective, you're just going to get sunburn, right? Heavily geared and you're encumbered in some way with all this equipment on you. High humidity, intense sunlight, the sun's at the peak with nothing blocking it and whatsoever. There's no shade at all, no cloud cover. The temperature increases even further, just like the chart shows. All that also leads to the midday heat check when the sun's at its peak and it's at its hottest and beating down on you, which is usually 3 hours past noon. Make a heat check. And again, this is on you as a dungeon master for how often you'd want to implement this type of check, whether it's hot, cold, you're in another plane of existence, whatever it is. How I would run it is if there's a period of time where I feel like they're out in the elements, I would figure out what the DC would be and have everybody make a heat check. The variable would change by 5s or by 2s, depending on how hard I want to be on them. It's for how difficult the DC is, and they would make the check or not. Because on a failure, you get 1 level of exhaustion, and if you fail by 5, you get 2 levels of exhaustion. Oof. And side note there, I'll put the link to this video down in the description, but I have a different exhaustion system because exhaustion in Dungeons & Dragons default is a bit too oppressive. So I have a different homebrew for that. That'll be down there. So again, anytime I feel as a dungeon master that would happen, I would ask them to make a check for it. Cool. I can have that mechanic be as oppressive or not as I want. Or if you want to run it differently, maybe it's only when the sun's at its peak at a certain time of day, whenever this certain storm blows through at a certain section of the area of the cold spot, however you want to do this, that is the only time. So when the sun's at its peak, make sure you stay around. So that hour that the sun's at its peak, maybe the players have to find some shade or shelter. And if they can't find that, oh no, they make the check. And a cool little caveat down here is if your character has resistance or immunity to fire, you gain a +5 to your modifier. Sweet. Another thing we did here mechanically is add some lingering conditions, not lingering injuries, it's a whole separate system. Lingering conditions specific to this environment. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke, dehydration, sunburn, all these different types of things that you can, again, choose to use or not. Anyone that uses the PDFs that me and my team make, I don't necessarily want you to just blindly implement them in general. And I wouldn't want you to do that with the base rules of Dungeons and Dragons. I want you to think outside the box. That's the whole point of this thing, is what things do you really want to hammer them on? Maybe you don't want to use dehydration because you don't really want to track food and water, so you just discount that. But anyway, now we got to combat the heat, and that's why this whole chart exists here. Multiple ways, like I said earlier, to combat this heat. We are throwing them into the fire, literally in this example, and you also want to give them tools that they can maybe find beforehand if they're clever and want to prepare, or they go there, they realize the mechanics here, we gotta go, and they back out, they leave, and they go to a nearby town or a settlement or somewhere, or maybe this place that has this equipment for them is further into the heat, so they have to trudge through the heat to get to a spot, find some shelter in a town that actually sells this stuff. Maybe they have to do quests to obtain some of these items. Maybe they have to get enough gold and they don't have enough gold. Whatever you want the thing to be, have to, whatever hoops you want to make them jump through. There's a bunch of really cool stuff. Something as simple as a simple veil that you can wear over yourself is a +1 to your modifier. We just talked in that last chart about having this DC and this increasing DC. Oh my God, it's crazy. Because I love having both. The environment, the external things, are stuff that's acting on you. The DC is going to start off at a certain temperature, and it's going to get worse based on how bad things are. If you don't have stuff, if you're not prepared, oh my God, it's so bad. The DC might be 35. I don't know. That could be crazy. And if you have these equipment, these items, and you have certain cooling stone, a veil, hot clothing, a ring of cold, and these all could be simple items that cost however much gold you want them to cost, or different quests you want them to accomplish, and they can acquire these things. So whenever they make that Constitution saving throw, they might have a +15 to that roll, a +20 even if they're super prepared and they have fire resistance or whatever. And again, that is on you as a dungeon master to see if you want to implement any sorts of things. Do you want to give them a whole bunch of tool options and you have a whole bunch of range in DC? NPCs, or do you want to keep it really simple and have like 2 temperature settings and maybe a +2 or a +4 if these other variables are going on, and then you wave the whole thing out of the way. If they have some hot clothing and a cold ring, okay, cool. You don't have to worry about anything. And then once they've accomplished and they've gotten the gear and they're ready for it, now the mechanics disappear. You could run it like that too. And if it sounds like I'm all over the place here, then good, because you and your table should be different than the other person that's also watching this video right now, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but we should all play the game the way that we want to, not some pre-prescribed way. So there's lots of different ways to do this, and I hope that comes across with this. So back to the gear. Another thing you can do with gear is apart from just giving out specific gear to the terrain, is wear down their current gear that they have that is not suited for this terrain. It can become damaged, broken, sand drenched, all that kind of stuff, to where you actually lose some of the equipment you have. So then maybe you can keep your equipment, but then you have to get other tools or other NPCs that know how to clean off. This also is very true in the Icewind Dale PDF about cold and items freezing. Like your sword just freezes solid. It's not even a sword anymore. It's just a block of ice. Maybe different types of metal don't get this cold, so they can still stay rigid and strong. And the same thing is true for the heat. And then this is maybe the coolest part. I don't know, this excites me, especially with the art right here in the corner. That's riding mounts, desert animal mounts, right? Camels, of course, that's simple. Drakes, sand lizards, giant lizards and scorpions, all different cool things that you could have. Imagine a town where they walk up to the town and they see a bunch of giant scorpions just kind of sitting there tied up on ropes. Like, what? You can easily mess with things like travel pace, and that is a simple way to do it, but you can also, again, give them some bonuses and cool benefits if they can get these mounts, which is another maybe side quest or gold expenditure. And then we keep going down other different ways for desert vehicles, sand ships, and the list goes on. But weather, you can get the day patterns of different things that happen as far as weather goes. Hot and cold nights, to where maybe the temperature changes, and at night maybe it gets really cold, and in the hot, so they have to maybe prepare for both. That could be crazy. Rainstorms, wind, sandstorms, all this different type of stuff that you can throw at them that is maybe predictable or maybe unpredictable. And this is a little excerpt about inhibited magics, where when you cast water magic of some kind, when you try and do it, maybe magic works a little different here. Maybe heat magic and fire magic's emboldened, and you roll an extra dice. You can re-roll some dice. Small little mechanics to make you really feel like it's hot in here. And look at that, that's 8 pages. This document is about 35 pages long, and that's only 8 pages to really take that desert to the next level and truly make your players feel like you're there, whether it's a campaign or not. And then obviously this is kind of just a little sneak peek of the PDF as well. The Adwaldi Desert, there's different cities and different NPCs that you can encounter and meet, different items that you can gather, town maps, all this other kind of stuff. Tons of really cool things. And I also want to show one of the monsters in this PDF, which I think is just absolutely sick. Look at that. A quartz, it's like a quartz golem. Oh, that's so sick. CR12 monster with a ton of really cool stuff in its arsenal. Not all stat blocks are big like this, because this thing has apex features, legendary features, layer actions, and all that kind of stuff. But I love to have dynamic monsters that are fun to fight, fun to play and run as a dungeon master. And you can really take these monsters in a cool setting and take the setting to the next level in this desert. So the best way I can describe this in a nutshell is bring the hammer down on your players mechanically with some different tweaks and changes that feel bad, feel crazy, feel hard to have to go through, feel challenging, right, to the players and to the world around them. And then once you've established that, don't forget to bring in some boosts to them, some gear they can wear to combat the things that are happening to them, some things they can ride on and travel to work through the terrain. So whether it be mechanics against them or mechanics on the terrain, give them things to be able to overcome that. So players in this desert, when they first enter the desert, they'd have nothing, and they're like, oh my God, we're gonna burn up, we're getting sunburned, we're dehydrated, this is terrible. They get to the first town that the quest NPC from before told them that you get to this town and then you'll be okay. They get there, they find some shade, they're like hot, and they're sitting around and they have to go do some quests, do some side quests, help some people, figure out some problems. And then fast forward a couple sessions, they have a riding scorpion that they have gear in a cold ring. They make plus 20 on all their checks. They don't care. They can go. The only thing they might have to worry about is when the sun's at its peak, strategize around that, and now they're ready to go. True desert heroes and champions that have earned that journey, and they feel like they've earned that journey. So I hope that helps y'all kind of make your players get immersed into your world in whatever ways you can, and throw a bunch of stuff at them, good and bad. Stay creative. Think outside the box. Peace.